The aim of the presentation today, which is called The Evidence You Decide, the Bible and Science, is indeed to provide some evidence as to why we should trust the Bible. And over 100 years ago, over the last 100 years, I should say, I'm sure you'll agree with me that the Bible's taken a bit of a battering from its critics. And that's why many people have turned their back on the Bible and think that it's pretty irrelevant, really, in the 21st century. And what I aim to do tonight, or this afternoon, is to show reasons why the Bible can be trusted. So we want to take a look at how people view science in relation to the Bible and see what we can learn. Now, there's quite a lot to get through. I hope I don't scramble your brains too much this afternoon. When scientists put men on the moon, people marvelled. When scientists developed computers, so the one you're looking at now, people were amazed. Scientists' achievements really do encourage people to trust their learning and their views. And every day we get headlines, don't we, particularly in the Express that I'm looking at and the Daily Mail, about this sort of thing, don't we? You see it time and time again. This is quite an old headline actually now, but there's been one recently, hasn't there, about some sort of pill that is going to extend our lives. Not sure that I want my life extended anyway, but scientists are coming up with these new things almost every day. And a lot of people believe that science has now irrefutably proved that the universe started with a big bang. And it's common to assume that life came about by a process of evolution. But if that assumption is true, it follows the Bible must be wrong in terms of talking about our world being created. But is this assumption true? Let's just think about this a little bit more. Because this afternoon we're going to look at some facts and opinions in science. The facts about the fossil record. The facts about the origin of the universe and life. Interestingly, what scientists themselves say about evolution. And finally, we'll look at an example of where scientific discoveries actually supports what the Bible tells us. So first of all then, some facts and opinions in science. I think we all agree that science has to work with facts. And there is a faraway nebula that's observed through a telescope. And that's a fact, isn't it? We can see it, straightforward. Similarly, a rock formation is a fact. And also a fossil in that rock formation is also a fact. But then there are opinions that are based on facts. So when you observe one thing, we may observe that other things appear to be related. And here's a good example. There are always clouds, aren't there, when rain starts to fall. But the appearance of clouds isn't always followed by rain. So in other words, clouds are facts, and to say it's going to rain is an opinion. Crucial that we get our heads around this, okay? So it is a fact there are similarities and dissimilarities between all living things. And we can put creatures into a classification system. So it is a fact that monkeys and humans are similar in some way. So we can put them into the same group. The theory of evolution tells us that apes developed into humans. So in that way we could say then that because the similarity is a fact, then the evolutionary explanation that apes developed into humans by gradual change is also a fact. But that would be overstating the case, wouldn't it? This is an opinion. And an equally valid explanation of the common features between apes and humans would be to say that some intelligent power created them all. The dissimilar features would then be explained as individual design. Okay, so let's have a look briefly about how a scientific theory is usually developed. Now, as we said, first of all, science is based on facts. Scientists will develop an idea that might explain the facts. But then they have to test the idea. They think of experiments, they try and predict from the idea what the outcome should be. And if what is predicted happens often enough in different experiments, the idea becomes a theory. If not all of the results confirm the idea, then it's modified, it's adapted, until it predicts correctly what's going to happen in all the experiments. So the more satisfactory tests that are performed, the more confidence scientists can have in the theory. Are you with it so far? Good. So, we can see a really important point here, that a theory must have extensive testing if we're going to have any confidence in it at all. So, a theory then can only be used and trusted in life when it's been tested and tried. So, here's another example. When engineers building a bridge have to accept the tested theories about the strength of their materials. They have to accept that and they have to work with them. So we should only put our trust then in theories that have been tested. So the theory of evolution is now taught as a fact in many of our schools. But can we be as confident in the theory of evolution as the designers of bridges are in the theories about the strength of their materials? What tests can we do to assure ourselves? Well, the fossil record is one of the main sources for the facts on which the theory of evolution is based. And going back to what we saw about the scientific method of establishing theories, we could say that the theory of evolution should be the best possible explanation of the observed facts in the fossil record, shouldn't we? Assuming that life has evolved continuously, we should expect the facts to show a continuous progression through all those stages. We should expect to find fossils of many plants and animals that are part way between all these different species. But what are the facts? Well, the facts are these. All fossils appear to come from well-defined species. No fossils have been found that can be considered transitional or part way between these major groups. And Darwin himself acknowledged this problem. He says this: as by this theory, innumerable transitional forms must have existed. Why do we not find them embedded in the crust of the earth? Why is all nature not in confusion, instead of being as we see them, well-defined species? The explanation lies, he says, however, in the extreme imperfection of the geological record. And that was in his famous book, The Origin of the Species. So Darwin was honest enough to admit the reality of what become known as the missing links. And he hoped that in time those gaps would be filled. But have they been filled? Recent quotations from scientists bring us up to the present day. Here's one from G.T. Neville. There is no need to apologise any longer for the poverty of the fossil record. In some ways it's become almost unimaginably rich, and discovery is outpacing integration. The fossil record, nevertheless, continues to be composed mainly of gaps. Here's a super admission, isn't it? Here's two more real admissions here. Stephen Gould. The extreme rarity of transitional forms in the fossil record is the trade secret, he says, of paleontology. Another one from Herbert Nielsen, Lund University in Switzerland. The fossil material is now so complete that the lack of transitional series cannot be explained by the scarcity of the material. The deficiencies are real, he says. They will never be filled. So it would seem then that the basic facts we would expect to find when considering the theory of evolution are not there. So that should make us very careful, shouldn't it, in accepting the theory with the same confidence that we have in other scientific laws. Okay, so what about the facts around the origin of the universe and life? And as we said, the Big Bang is now the dominant scientific theory about the origin of the universe. And according to this theory, the universe was created sometime between 10 and 20 billion years ago from a cosmic explosion that hurled all matter in different directions. And this Big Bang theory was initially suggested because it explains why distant galaxies appear to be travelling away from us at very great speeds. And it also explains the existence of cosmic background radiation. These are opinions based on facts on the universe as we see it today. But of course, there are no known facts about the origin of the universe because there was no one around at the time. So we have an equally valid explanation of known facts. The universe was created by God. And when we think about the origin of life, we should remember that the theory of evolution is all about the development of living things. So, in other words, life has to be there in the first place to be developed. Evolution has nothing to say about how life began. It doesn't help at all in answering the question of how life started. Science has no facts about the start of life. And although there are many theories about how life might have begun, scientists have no way of knowing what might be the most plausible. So they have no facts to go on. The origin of life is an area of pure speculation. Yet again, an equally valid explanation we have is that life was created by a master designer. Let's take a look at a couple of typical statements made about evolution. We need to look very carefully at things that are said to encourage belief in evolution, because some very scientific sounding arguments are used, but some confuse facts with opinions. Let's look at some quotations then from evolutionists. William Stokes and William Lee. The fossil record furnishes irrefutable proof that life on Earth has changed through the ages. Fossils prove not only that life has changed, but also that it has progressed from simplicity to complexity with the passage of time. These are the facts. To those who take an unbiased view of the matter, there is only one conclusion, that all past and present life has descended from simple beings. Now, if we look at this statement carefully, we can see that, yeah, the facts are the fossils, both simple and complex. The opinion based on facts is that life has progressed from simplicity to complexity. But there is no evidence even to suggest how one has developed from another. So once again, an equally valid conclusion that could be drawn for the facts is that life was designed and created. Here's another one from Julian Huxley. You might have heard of him. The first point to make about Darwin's theory of evolution is that it is no longer a theory, but a fact. No serious scientist would deny the fact that evolution occurred, just as he would not deny the fact that the Earth goes round the sun. Now, that quotation gives the impression, doesn't it, that evolution has the same kind of evidence behind it as scientific law. But as we've seen in the fossil record section, the facts of the fossil record don't support the theory of evolution. And we see a hint of a reason for this unscientific bias in favour of evolution in this quotation from George Vault. He says this: when it comes to the origin of life on this earth, there are only two possibilities: creation or spontaneous generation. There is no third way. Spontaneous generation was disproved 100 years ago, but that leads us only to one other conclusion, that of supernatural creation. We cannot accept that on philosophical grounds. Therefore, we choose to believe the impossible, that life arose spontaneously by chance. So here we begin to see the reason why opinions are sometimes used as facts, because the only alternative, a special creation, is just totally unacceptable to some people. So let's have a quick summary then of what we've seen. Observable facts then must be differentiated from opinions. Opinions shouldn't be treated as facts. The facts of the fossil record don't support evolution. Science can only work with the facts of the universe as they are now. No informed comment can be made on the origin of life or the universe because there aren't any facts to work with. And an equally valid explanation of the fact is that the universe and life were created. We've also seen that evolution is sometimes upheld because creation is just an unacceptable alternative. So the overall conclusion we come to is that in a sense, science and the Bible are not in conflict when considering evolution, because evolution just has not been proved scientifically. Before we go on to the next session, I think we're going to take a little break, just to give our brains a little rest after all that, and we'll go on to a slightly different topic. So we're going to sing. So in the second part then, we want to look at how some modern discoveries actually support the Bible. Now, the Bible makes no comment on how our world began. The first verse of the Bible says, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." So the Bible says there was a creator, and modern science has discovered something of the remarkable organisation of living things. And all of this points, does it not, to a creator. This is where science supports the Bible. And we'll now take a look at some of the discoveries of science that provide evidence for a creator. Because we're going to have a look at the so-called simple cell, and this is the technical bit. Okay? Now, sometimes when describing evolution, it's said that complex chemicals collected together to form a simple cell. This was the extent of the knowledge about the cell when Darwin first formulated the theory of evolution. The impression given is that a cell is a collection of a few chemicals that could work together and reproduce themselves. But the simple cell is far more complex than that. The cell is the basic unit of all life. All living things are made up of cells. And plants and animals are made up of, in fact, many different types of cells. The human body contains 10 trillion cells, and there are about 200 different types. And here's a simulated picture of highly magnified red blood cells in an artery. And it would take about 40,000 of those red blood cells to fill a normal sized letter O on a printed page. And it takes millions of cells to make up the skin on the palm of your hand. All cells have got common features, whether or not they are specialised animal cells. Single cell organisms like this Euglena in the picture, they live in fresh water. In warm weather they form a green scum on the surface of ponds. We have one at Olivet and it's absolutely green at the moment, so that's loads of those on the surface of the water. A cell is alive. It's as alive as you or I are, although we don't possibly feel it just at the moment. But it breathes, it takes in food, gets rid of wastes, it grows, it reproduces, and in time it dies. And single cell animals incorporate many of these complex mechanisms that we're going to look at now. So this picture shows the main parts of a typical animal cell. And just as your houses have got kitchens, living rooms, bedrooms, bathrooms, so a cell has got these specialised areas partitioned off for specific uses. These areas include these: the mitochondria, and that produces the cell's energy; the nucleus, which controls the cell growth, function, reproduction. It contains something we've all heard of, the DNA, the cell's source of information, a library if you like. The lysosome here, the cell's waste disposal unit. Something called the Golgi apparatus. That's a storage area for proteins being transported somewhere else. And something, I love the title of this one, the endoplasmic reticulum. Remember that one, won't you? And that just processes proteins. Now each compartment is sealed off from the rest of the cell by its own membrane, just as a room is separated in a house by walls and doors. And in total there are 20 different sections in a cell. And the cell is continually making new complex chemicals called proteins and getting rid of old ones. Some sections of the cell make these chemicals for themselves, but the great majority of these proteins are centrally made and moved to other compartments. And the carriage of proteins between compartments is, trust me, a fascinating and integrated, or intricate rather, process. And the details differ depending on the destination, just as the carrier details of a parcel are different depending on whether it's going down the road or to a totally different country. So let's go on a little fascinating journey of a protein needed by the cell from its place of manufacture in the cell to the arrival at the correct place in the cell. So we're going to take a look at what's involved in the making of a protein and moving to its correct destination. Like a parcel, it's got to be labelled correctly, taken to the destination and then delivered correctly. This journey from the nucleus to the lysosome is a distance of 0.002 millimetres. So a pretty long journey. The lysosome, as we've said, is the waste disposal unit. The protein we're going to follow is called lysosomal hydrolase, and that helps break down unwanted chemicals in the lysosome. Don't worry about the name, we're just going to call it the protein. Okay, so when the cell senses, by mechanisms we're not going to go into, that it needs more of this protein in the waste disposal unit, the process to make that protein is set in motion. And every protein has the information for its manufacture stored in the nucleus in the form of DNA. So, a copy of the DNA is made in the nucleus. The copy of the DNA floats over to a pore in the nucleus's wall. The proteins in the pore recognise a signal on the code copy that opens up the pore. And then the code copy passes through the open pore and floats into the cell fluid surrounding the nucleus. Once the DNA code copy is in the fluid, the protein building begins. And during its manufacture, the protein enters the endoplasmic reticulum by a very complex procedure. Then it's processed and it leaves by another equally complex procedure. And then it goes into the Golgi apparatus. Inside the Golgi apparatus is an identification tag. That's added, that indicates where it's going to be taken, just like an address label on a parcel. So then a little subcompartment containing that protein is made and it splits off from the body of the Golgi apparatus. There's an identification tag on the outside of that subcompartment that indicates its destination. And that subcompartment then moves to its destination, the lysosome. There's a port marker on the outside of the lysosome which is identical to the ID tag on that subcompartment. Still with it? Okay. The subcompartment then merges by another complex procedure with the lysosomy, and, hey presto, the protein has arrived. Now that incredible process happens many billions of times in every cell of our bodies during our lifetimes. And it's one of many such processes that have to take place regularly in all living cells for life to continue. And that process by which the protein passes from compartment to compartment in the cell has been called gated transport. It's a means of allowing only certain chemicals through the wall and keeping all the rest out. So consider the early part of the journey of that protein, where the signal on the DNA code copy opens the pore and allows the code copy out of the nucleus. We can see that 3 elements are needed to make the system work. There has to be an ID tag, there has to be a scanner, and there has to be a gate that's activated by the scanner. If any of those elements are not in place and working, then the system doesn't work. The last stage of the journey, the protein's journey, is even more complex. Delivery to the waste disposal unit needs 5 elements to make it work. Same, again, ID tag on the protein, a scanner on the subcompartment, the same ID tag on the subcompartment, a scanner in the wall of the lysosomy, a gate in the wall activated by the scanner. Wow. All of these systems are what we can call irreducibly complex. They can't work unless all of the components are there. And when there's just one defect in the system that we've looked at, the results can be tragic. Eye cell disease is caused when there's just one defect. And the protein never reaches its correct destination, like a letter going to the wrong address. As a result, the cell can't dispose of its waste products. And the terrible consequences of that can include stunted growth, puffed up eyes and face, bent legs, difficult movement, mental retardation, an enlarged heart, liver and spleen, possible death by the age of 5. Now, it just shows how vital it is to have all of these complex systems in perfect working order before the cell can work. No one has offered a plausible explanation of how these systems could have developed as required by evolution. And talking about the different membrane-bounded compartments of the cell, called organelles, famous Turkish evolutionist Ali Demirsory wrote in his book Inheritance and Evolution the following. One of the most difficult stages to be explained in evolution is to scientifically explain how organelles developed from these primitive creatures. No creature or group has yet been found with organelles of a simpler construction in any way, or which are more primitive. In other words, the organelles carried forward have developed just as they are. They have no simple and primitive forms. So this scientist is honest enough to admit that evolutionists have a problem trying to explain how the cell came into being by the process of evolution. So as we saw earlier, we must remember not to confuse facts and opinions, because the facts that we've just been looking at are these. The cell is the basis of all life. It's incredibly complicated. The cell contains many irreducibly complex systems. Tragic results occur if just one element in many of the complex systems doesn't work correctly, and no one has actually discovered a partially developed cell. And I would say that quite apart from this wonderful process we've just been through, the many irreducibly complex systems in the cell, which is the basis of life, point wholeheartedly to a designer and a creator. Now there are some theories which attempt to explain how the cell evolved, but virtually all of them assume the cell came from simpler organisms already having the complex systems that cells we know today have. But so those theories don't explain the gradual evolution in small steps of the incredibly complex subcellular systems that we've been looking at. So we've seen just how incredibly complicated the cell is. And this is in fact just what the Bible tells us in very well-known words in Psalm 139 and verse 14. I will praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvellous are your works. So let's just summarise for a moment what we've seen so far. Evolution has not been proved scientifically. We've seen that science actually and the Bible are not in conflict when considering how life began. The cell, the basis of all life, shows absolutely evidence of design. And that complex systems of the cell haven't been explained by gradual evolution. So here are some points to think about then. First of all, we've seen that evolution is a highly unlikely explanation of how life on Earth started. Secondly, we must remember that people want to believe in evolution because creation is unacceptable. People don't want to be responsible to a creator, and evolution conveniently removes that responsibility. Thirdly, remember that when the facts are considered, it makes sense to believe in a creator. Much more sense than believing that our incredibly complex, organised world could happen by chance. I've often said it would take more faith, from my point of view, to believe in that than in a creator. So if it makes sense to believe in a creator, it must also make sense to look at his message, and that message, of course, is in the Bible. Andrew's going to read us a few words from Acts chapter 17 and verse 24 to verse 31. Andrew.
God, who made the world and everything in it, since he is Lord of heaven and earth, does not dwell in temples made with hands. Nor is he worshipped with men's hands as though he needed anything, since he gives to all life, breath and all things. And he has made from one blood every nation of men to dwell on all the face of the earth, and has determined their pre-appointed times and the boundaries of their dwellings, so that they should seek the Lord in the hope that they might grope for him and find him, though he is not far from each one of us. For in him we live and move and have our being, as also some of your own poets have said, for we are also his offspring. Therefore, since we are the offspring of God, we ought not to think that the divine nature is like gold or silver or stone, something shaped by art and man's devising. Truly these times of ignorance God overlooked, but now commands all men everywhere to repent, because he has appointed a day on which he will judge the world in righteousness by the man whom he has ordained. He has given assurance of this to all by raising him from the dead.
Thanks, Andrew. So, what can we see then from this message? Look at verse 25. God sustains all life. Verse 26. He has a purpose for our world. Verse 27. He intends us to search out his purpose. There's got to be some effort from us. Same verse. He will reveal himself to those who do search. Verse 30. He expects a response from us. And verse 31, the two biggies. He is going to intervene in our world. And finally, he is capable of raising the dead. That's a wonderful message to have, isn't it, in our difficult world. So, in conclusion, we must not allow ourselves to be deceived. We all have the God-given ability to understand these things. Wisdom and knowledge are not the special prerogative of people who consider themselves experts, and I don't, by the way, on cells, whether they're scientists or theologians. The organisation of life, the incredible complexity of life, clearly point to a creator. And in the Bible, we can read for ourselves about God's plan for his creation, including every one of us who want to learn from him. And so each one of us can read it for ourselves.